This week's blog post is the 8th and final one in my series on the Clark Art Institute. On the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts, see the first post in this series. In this post, we'll look at a dozen of my favorite sculptures of the Clark from the 18th and 19th centuries. There are many, many more sculptures that I'm not showing. First up, Jean-Baptiste Lemoine the Younger, 1704 to 1778, was the most notable member of a family of French sculptors who flourished under Louis XIV and Louis XV, which means 1654 to 1774. Lemoine's specialty was lively, elegant portraits such as this one of Louis XV. It owes a good deal to Bernini's 1665 portrait of Louis XIV, which Lemoine probably saw on display in Paris. Houdon, one of the most notable sculptors of the later 18th century, was a student of Lemoine. Private citizens often displayed sculptures such as this one of Louis XV in their homes to demonstrate their loyalty to the king. A mass-produced ceramic such as this one was less expensive than a marble or a bronze bust. Next up, Jean-Jacques Feuchère, Satan, 1833. This is a reminder of the darker side of the Romantic movement. Satan sulks with a broken sword in hand, his bat-like wings wrapped around him. This is a small bronze, barely a foot high. This one is by Hébert, 1823 to 1893, who studied with Feuchère, the one who did the Satan we just saw. This bust, which is plaster with a thin layer of terracotta, Hébert brings to vivid life the author Honoré de Balzac, 1799 to 1850, who was famous for The Human Comedy, set of 91 finished and 46 unfinished short stories, novels, and essays that were published from 1829 to 1848. The most famous, or possibly notorious, portrait of Balzac is by Rodin, but I prefer Hébert's. On the base of the Hébert is relief that refers to a chapter in Balzac's The Physiology of Marriage, published in 1829, in which Balzac discusses the benefits of married couples sleeping in separate beds. Next up, Degas. This sculpture is unusual for two reasons, which I did not know until I started reading up on it. First, it's unusual because Degas chose to show not a famous, elegant ballerina, but a ballerina in training. Second, the version that was displayed at the 1881 Impressionist exhibition was modeled of wax, with an added skirt of tulle and a human hair wig and a silk hair ribbon. The Degas estate sold bronze casts of the ballet dancer from 1919 to 1930, but you can still see the original wax version at the National Gallery in Washington. This one is by Sarah Bernhardt. When she was in her late 20s, Bernhardt, 1844 to 1923, was chafing at being cast only in minor roles. As a way to blow off steam, she began learning to sculpt. In 1874, she landed a supporting role in Octave Fayet's The Sphinx. She soon took over the lead role, portraying a woman who commits suicide by using a poison ring in the shape of a sphinx. As a nod to her big break, Bernhardt sculpted this self-portrait as a sphinx, or chimera, with the body of a griffin, the wings of a bat, and a dragon's tail. I assumed at first that she was thinking of herself as a monster, but in fact she is referring to her ability to transform herself. The clue is that she's put a mask of tragedy and comedy on either shoulder. This small bronze is not just a self-portrait, but a functional inkwell with a stand for a quill. On tours in America, Australia, and elsewhere, Bernhardt would often have a cast of the inkwell put on display in the theater lobby. I first saw one at the Clark. Next up, several works by Jean-Baptiste Corpeau, 1827 to 1875. Corpeau is one of my favorite French sculptors and one of my favorite 19th century sculptures from any country. His works always show remarkable passion and energy. The ones you're most likely to be familiar with are Ugolino, of which there's a marble version at the Metropolitan Museum, and The Dance, a sculpture that Corpeau did for the facade of the Bure Garnier in Paris. Clark has several works by Corpeau that I like very much. First up, Mater Dolorosa, 1870, a meticulously detailed head in flawless Carrara marble of a mother lamenting the loss of her child. At the other end of the emotional spectrum is the light-hearted Three Graces, 1872. Like The Dance, the original of this work was created for the facade of the Garnier Opera House in Paris. But Clark owns a bronze caster's model that would have been used to make mock copies, which means you can take it apart. Carpeaux was also a top-notch portrait sculptor. This bust is of Alexandre Dumas fils, 1824 to 1895, the son of the author of The Three Musketeers. Dumas fils was author of The Lady of the Camellias, whose story was adapted for Verdi's La Traviata. And the last work by Carpeaux is even more directly related to opera, which was a tremendously popular art form in the late 19th century. This one shows Charles Gounod, whose most famous opera, Faust, premiered in 1859. The ability that Carpeaux has to make a figure in a portrait bust look this dynamic, that's really quite rare. And the last one that we'll look at today is a Remington sculpture. A cavalryman helps his wounded bunkmate escape to safety. Within a quarter century, after this work was done in 1896, this sort of sharply focused, detailed representational art was falling out of fashion. On the wall behind the figure, incidentally, is a painting by Remington, which we saw last week, I think. The Clark also has many beautiful decorative arts, including some exquisite Sèvres and Meissen china. I'm not going to do separate blog posts about those. I've written about the 19th century in French art in Seismic Shifts in Subject and Style, 19th century French painting and philosophy. It's a good place to start if you're interested in the changes in art during the 19th century, and especially if you're interested in what major artists think about the role of training in art, the role of reason versus emotion in creating art, the importance of style versus subject, and who is qualified to judge art. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.